General Protocol Spaces, banking on freedom.
So welcome to General Bull 41 of N. This is nominally, we're just going to talk about BCH and BTC, different approaches to network upgrades, because this is an interesting topic. It's a very open-ended, to a large degree subjective topic, but it's a very important one. You know, how are decisions made on these networks that control a huge amount of value, right? And so it's a good topic, and we had some level of disagreement or challenge in Twitter discussions, all in text, which never conveys nuance and never conveys the full, as Reardon pointed out in the discussion, there's nuance to it. And I said, tell me the nuance, and he said, maybe we should talk on voice, and I was like, yeah, maybe you're right. We should talk on voice about this. So here we are. And it'll be a good chance to talk. And before we get started, so I'm here, Emergent Reasons, John. I work for General Protocols. We're a company that builds applications using smart contracts and the features of Bitcoin Cash to make it powerful and make it available to people. Reardon, could you give a quick introduction to let people know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Reardon or Brandon. I have been working on Bitcoin related things, generally self-custody related, for about 7 years now. And I'm now, as of this moment, I'm now a independent Bitcoin educator and developer. We'll see how that goes for me this year, and I may go back to a company in the future. But yeah, I'm really focused on primarily teaching people about the game theory and the consensus of Bitcoin. And so that's why this is such an important conversation to have for me.
That's fantastic. And Callisti, also, could you quickly give everybody a short intro?
Hi, I'm Callisti. I'm the lead developer for the Selene wallet for Bitcoin Cash. We aim to be one of the most user-friendly and awesome wallets in the whole crypto space. And I've been a part of the Bitcoin Cash community since sometime around 2021. It's probably when I got most immersed into it. And it's been really nice to be able to chat with the likes of Emergent, Reardon, and everyone else on both sides of the BCH BTC fence. It's been just a really nice time being able to find people who are high signal and being able to chat with them. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nice. Thank you. It's very glad you could join us. And how about our pet QR code? How did you become self-aware?
Hey, so I've been in BCH for a while, and I currently work at General Protocols. Most of the time, I'm just writing algorithms and getting hounded by Emergent Reasons for being late to delivering stuff. So, yeah, that's what I do.
Nice. All right. Yeah, so we have a very highly capable, so I know everyone here, a very highly capable group of people here. There's no shallow talent speaking right now. So this is great to have such a powerful group of voices. So let's just start. Let's get straight into it. So there's all these technical things that we all work on a day-to-day basis. But Reardon or Brandon, which one should I call you? Which one do you prefer?
I guess we're on the internet right now, so Reardon's probably the most reasonable.
That's usually what I go with too. Yeah. So Reardon, why don't you tell us, what is it about, you were saying consensus specifically, right? I think there's a lot of shared place where we think self-custody, game theory, all of those things are very important, even though we may come to different conclusions about, what all of it means and what should be done. But could you tell us about that? Like, what is it that you teach people about consensus? What is your view on how BTC consensus works? Like, what's the big picture from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think I would say the biggest thing about Bitcoin consensus, and actually we were talking about this at the Seattle BitDevs meeting last evening, is just that it's a global consensus process, and there I don't know if you guys saw, there was this write-up called BCAP, the Bitcoin Consensus something project, I think it is, that Steve Lee and some other folks wrote up recently, and I think they did a reasonable job of kind of covering the way there are many different stakeholders involved in building consensus for any change you might want to make to the consensus rules for Bitcoin, from miners to users to wallet developers or application developers, to the Bitcoin Core maintainers, to hashers versus block template builders. There's a bunch of different kind of groups in the ecosystem that all have to reach some level of consensus to make changes to Bitcoin. I don't agree with everything in that paper, but I think broadly speaking, it's a good summary of the Bitcoin consensus landscape. And now what it doesn't tell us is how one would actually go about achieving consensus on making a change to Bitcoin. Unlike most other cryptocurrency networks, I think BCH is, and I said this at the meeting last evening, BCH is one of the other kind of somewhat decentralized or fairly decentralized blockchain or crypto networks out there. So other networks have more of a process, a written down, here's how we achieve consensus on a change to the network. And Bitcoin, I would say intentionally does not have that. There's no written process. There's an emergent thing that has to happen by talking to a bunch of people, by sufficiently educating enough people, by explaining the benefits of a change to all of those different stakeholder groups and getting them excited about it, you can eventually reach consensus. So I guess that's my summary there for Bitcoin.
Just as an aside, do you think that you can drop a link to that paper you were just talking about in the comments for the space?
Yeah, let me do that.
I think it's kind of interesting the way that you frame that too, like having the defined process versus like having this kind of emergent consensus. Because I would say that with the way that we approach that is like pretty firmly in the middle of that. I'm sure Emergent and Imaginary would love to talk about that. The chip process is like our crown jewel as far as consensus building.
Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, as the original author of that process, I wouldn't call it the crown jewel. It's more like, oh my God, we're in deep shit and everything is burning down. Let's put together something that works. Hey, it works kind of okay. Let's go with it, kind of thing. So I would say that the BCH and BTC actually shares a very important part of the consensus process that a lot of other chains do not share, which is that as you said just now, well you said that there is no formal process. I would say that the most important shared trait here is that there is no final deciding organization, like in ETH for example, practically speaking, there are those calls and things are decided in those calls, and that is where things get decided. And in a lot of other chains, there is this foundation. The foundation has a committee. That committee decides things. In BCH and BTC, there are no such committees and there is no foundation to decide things. So this is the part that we share. What we do not share is that BCH has a rather well-known guideline and process to things. Okay, if you want a consensus rule change, here is what you do. There are some timelines. We are firmly aware that in extreme cases, none of this would bind because they are extreme. But roughly speaking, this is what you follow, and people have done this before, and then you would get an outcome or not. And this can all happen in an orderly way. While as far as I can see in BTC, this doesn't seem to happen in an orderly way. That's the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, how would something as broadly decentralized with the amount of value locked up in it that there is as Bitcoin, BTC, how would one even create an orderly process? And how would you prevent that orderly process from then being co-opted?
Right. I mean, it's as I said, like our process, I wouldn't call it like the gold standard, like the crown jewel or anything, but it is something that we made in a pile of burning rubble and collapsing buildings, and it's kind of worked. the question that we asked when we made that process is that, okay, we have a process. Could it be hijacked? No, nothing is perfect. Of course, it could be hijacked. We could think of 100 ways. What happens if we don't have a process? Is that outcome something that we want? Is that easier or harder to hijack? That is for everything that you do or don't do, you always ask the question, like, what is the alternative? What does that look like? And do I want that, or do I want the thing that I'm considering right now? Right. So
Yeah, keep
yes,
going,
the
man.
seen and
So,
the
so
unseen.
what is the yeah, well, it's a very good point that there's no such thing as a perfect anything, really, right? So um the concept that, oh, there is something that's completely non-capturable, I think we can all agree that consensus is not some magical 15th dimension thing that exists independent of humanity and just works by itself. That fundamentally consensus on any kind of network, especially a money network, is fundamentally a social construct. Is that something that is that a view that you share, Reardon?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This is
Okay.
I've said this. I think this is a something worthwhile to kind of just think about broadly when I'm thinking about consensus. That, to a certain degree, the consensus changes that we will get, or even the consensus process that we will get, will reflect the desires of the broader community, whether we as let's say the developers or the educators in the space want it to or not. What we can kind of observe then is that the Bitcoin broader community essentially can be said to want chaos to some degree, and the BCH broader community can be said to want order to some degree. I think communities do get exactly what they want, often through roundabout ways.
Wow, I would really challenge that. So BCH wants not order, but I think stability. Order is maybe not the right word for it. Stability is important, and we know that probably better than any chain how important stability is.
Oh God.
Yeah. So, but what I would challenge on that is, do you? So maybe get into something contentious. Do you think that BTC has order, or doesn't have order? So from my perspective, BTC actually is very well ordered, more ordered than BCH, and not in a good way from my perspective, right? So that's maybe one of those central crux of disagreements or nuance that we were talking about on Twitter. But so you really see that you think BTC is a quite a chaotic environment from a consensus perspective. Is that the case?
Yeah, very much so. What we can observe, kind of looking at Bitcoin BTC development over the years, is that at certain times there has been a fair amount of order around it. Let's say in the eras of Peter Wulla and Vladimir Vanderland being kind of in two different roles, but broadly kind of guiding Bitcoin. And before that, Greg Maxwell and others as well. So at certain times, Bitcoin has had a great deal of order in consensus, because there have been individuals who people in the community trust to guide the consensus process. And right now in Bitcoin, there simply is not anybody or any group of people who are trusted to guide the consensus process. And in the absence of any trusted guides, there simply is no order around how one would even attempt to make a consensus change, or how one would build consensus or find a new leader for consensus changes, or any of that. There simply is no path and no person or group of people who has control of it. So what we have in Bitcoin as a result is we have a very well-ordered process for making non-consensus software changes. And that, as I would say broadly working quite well. The Bitcoin node software is improving year by year in very important ways, and becoming more performant and more reliable, and even more feature rich in terms of new things that are happening on it, like what are called truck transactions and anchor transactions. There's lots of things that are being improved in the non-consensus software part of the Bitcoin project. But in the terms of consensus, we do not have any kind of order or process or anything like that.
Let me ask, how would you describe what you see as the process that led to Taproot. So for the people who are listening, Taproot is an upgrade that BTC underwent in the last few years. And I'd like to hear what do you think was the kind of process or emergent steps? What is it that happened that led to that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it was a multi-year project that really kind of started not long after segregated witness was activated on Bitcoin. And at first there was a period of let's say ideation where there were many different ideas presented from, Greg Maxwell had Groot, and then Peter Wohler started thinking about Entroot, and then there was the MAST proposal that was not eventually adopted, but there was kind of a informant towards the Taproot direction. There was a bunch of different proposals and ideas that were thrown around for the period kind of soon after segregated witness. At some point, I can't remember who it was, but someone who was kind of fairly trusted in the space said, okay, we have to start deciding what we're actually going to do. And that was where I think Peter Wohler was one of the main folks, and there was a couple other folks involved, but kind of took it and said, okay, what are the ideas we have that are ready that we could actually implement today? And that would make sense for a next upgrade for Bitcoin. They started refining that. And that then was kind of the ladder, like the third year after SegWit. I'm trying to remember the exact years. I don't remember exactly. So anyway, so around that time, the third year-ish after SegWit, they were kind of refining it down to a concrete set of ideas. They started writing those down in BIPs and writing the code for them and testing the code. And at some point they were introduced and published via, like, Blockstream is one of the main channels for publication, let's say, for here's this set of Taproot BIPs that has these features in it. And one of the things that happened at that point that I want to call out, and that is, I think, very important to what's next for Bitcoin itself, is that around that time there was this accident that happened. And I don't think it was intentional on anyone's part, but it happened, and it was not a good thing. And that is that people took a bunch of the ideas that were bandied about earlier in the process and imagined that they were in the concrete proposals that were made for actually doing Taproot. And one of those, for example, was CISA, or cross input signature aggregation. Another one was MAST that I mentioned already, localized abstract syntax trees. And neither of those are actually in Taproot, but people imagined them into Taproot when they saw, here's the Taproot proposals. They just imagined those things were actually in there. And that then became part of the marketing for Taproot. And I don't know exactly how this happened or anything, but that wasn't corrected. And so then we went on and we went through kind of a refining and activation process. So the last year before Taproot, leading up to the locking in, I think it was August of 2021, it locked in November it activated or something like that. I don't have the exact dates. But leading up to that, there was a refining process where minor details were worked out and the code was carefully reviewed and tests were added up the wazoo. And in that refining period is when what I would consider now an unfortunate change was made to use 32-byte instead of 33-byte keys for Taproot. Details we don't need to necessarily get into. So that gets up to the code is now ready. They merged the code into Bitcoin Core without activation parameters. And then there was this whole shitstorm in Bitcoin over how we activate a change to Bitcoin. Should it be done with BIP 8 or BIP 9? Speedy trial, lock in on time is true or false, and all these debates. Eventually, it was decided by a couple of people kind of going off in a room and talking together. I think Ava Chow was one of them, and someone else. They decided to use a speedy trial activation, which is basically a rapid signaling process using miners to signal readiness for Taproot. And that ended up activating Taproot. Again, there's some debate as to whether that activated it or whether some other method activated it because there was a shitstorm over it. And that's pretty much the process that happened. And you can kind of hear throughout that there are specific individuals who drove the process, most notably Peter Wohler and Vladimir Vanderlaan, with Vladimir being kind of the coordinator of who kind of accepts the big consensus changes into the repository, and Peter Wohler being the finisher, the driver of refining it down to a concrete set of proposals and code.
So here's a question. So effectively, the final piece last time was basically the speedy trial, and a threshold activation within a given period, that is defined in code. Do you see that with this precedent set, do you see that, whatever the next consensus change is, because we know that there will be one at some point, maybe it's in the distant future, maybe it's in the near future, we don't know, but eventually there will be. Do you see that? Do you see that this might become just the way to upgrade, or do you think that there will be some other way, or would there be another big debate all over again?
I think it's very clear there'll be another big debate. There's not really any consensus on upgrade methods for Bitcoin. There's already been quite a lot of discussion. Moonsettler, who I believe is in the audience, has had some long discussions with Luke Dasher or Dash Jr., whatever his actual preferred pronunciation is there. Anyway, with Luke about it, and it seems as though a block height activation using version bits and lock-in on time equals true with kind of several signaling cycles over a 12-ish month period. And, there's a bunch of parameters that go into the activation process, is the most likely. Luke feels that it's very important that there be a lock-in on time is true, which speedy trial lacks. So I think it's unlikely the speedy trial will be used again. So anyway, the short answer is no. I don't think speedy trial will be the clear method going forward, and we don't know what it will be.
Got it. Okay, I was not hoping. I was thinking that since Taproot, speedy trial will be more favored as a way to upgrade next time, but it's kind of interesting to hear that it has not gained any dominance.
Yeah, and
I
part of
kind
the
of
reason
remember
is that.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I kind of remember around the time that the speedy trial was happening, it seems pretty contentious from my point of view, because there were a lot of people who just disagreed with it conceptually. Like, okay, should we be activating so quickly? I think you mentioned there was the merge into the code base in August, and then the lock-in was then in August, and then it deployed in November. That's a pretty short turnaround. So if it's with miner signaling too, I feel like it also begs the question of how involved are the miners? Are they actually paying attention, or are they just shipping whatever code just happens to be in the repo without really analyzing it? And then how do you kind of determine consensus around that? Like, what was there actually agreement, or are people just kind of doing things blindly?
I would say there was plenty of time in there. The code merge happened about 1 year before activation, and then signaling started several months after the code merge, and then activation was several months after that. There was I would say plenty of time. There was enough time in there. So yeah, no, it was not like a rushed thing, or it wasn't like a blind thing. The problem that I mentioned is that the bridge between people that did understand the code and people that didn't understand the code had errors in it, and those were material errors. And so you've heard some people saying Taproot was a failure. Udi is an example of that. And part of what they're saying is Taproot, the way that the broader non-code reading community understood it, was different than Taproot that was actually implemented in code. And somehow, and again, I'm not going to cast blame or try to anything other than just that incorrectness in the bridge between the developers who read and write code and the non-technical part of Bitcoin was not corrected at any point from code merge through activation. And so then all the way through activation, the non-technical parts of the community thought we were getting something we weren't getting. And that was the error that happened.
Was that something that was able to be identified before activation, that there was that disconnect?
It definitely could have been. And frankly, it's part of what drove me to becoming more public in the Bitcoin space, because I observed this, like what I would say, a problem in that bridge. And I think I'm at least a moderately skillful bridge there between code reader and writers and non-code reader and writers.
I mean, it's not a problem specific to Bitcoin. It has, the difference between people who write the rules and people who, have to obey the rules, have been with humanity since, I don't know, thousands of years ago. So it's not a new problem, but it is interesting to see it play out in the space of blockchain consensus.
I remember a specific thing that really struck me as odd during the process of a Taproot activation is that there was really no, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there was really no public interest in it from Bitcoin companies, from anybody who was building. I didn't see anybody who was super interested on a large scale, but there was Poolin, it's a pool. So Poolin is a very large mining pool. And they were, for some reason, really interested in it and really pushing for activation of it. And when I asked one of their executives, like, well, why are you pushing Taproot? What is in it for you? I never got an answer. Like, I never got a meaningful answer for it. It was really bizarre. I never quite understood why they particularly were so interested in it. It smelled like there was some other factor in the picture that I didn't understand. But do you have any insight on that?
It will be so cute if that ended up being an ordinals play.
No, I don't think anyone had considered the ordinals opportunity at that time. Yeah. Anyway, just interesting. So I do have at least some amount of insight there, and it actually goes right back to what I was saying about the error in the bridge between coders and non-coders, which is there was this weird, and I mean literally weird in kind of a scientific sense, loop that happened where coders created Taproot. There was an error in the bridge that made users excited about Taproot, but thinking it was something it wasn't. And then users who were excited about it pushed on businesses and miners to activate it. There was this, the whole green boxes movement on X, or well, it was Twitter at the time, is a big part of what made many entities interested in Taproot. And so the error in the bridge, I would say, is what made the speedy trial happen, because I don't think it would have succeeded in the speedy trial had it not been for the error in the bridge between the coders and the non-coders.
Interesting. I have doubts about that. I think it would have gone through anyway, because I have a very different perspective on what actually drove that process. But it's these things are very hard to say. They're very subjective and hard to say who has what motivations. Let me ask a different question.
Why don't you say your perspective and how it's different? I would love to hear it as well.
Sure. So what seems obvious because of our past experience with BTC, obviously we came from BTC, right? Like back in the day, it was just one chain. And it seems pretty obvious that really the keys to the kingdom are held by a very small group of people. Some of the ones that you mentioned in the past, and some of them are still the same today, but fundamentally core and Blockstream related people hold the keys to the kingdom and really are making the calls. And then who is influencing them? I don't know. It's easy to speculate on who might be influencing their decision making, but maybe it's just them. Who knows? But yeah, that's really what I think is the consensus process of BTC is whatever core maintainers say.
I want to clarify something. I don't think any of the core maintainers or BIPs maintainers are employed at Blockstream currently, and only a couple of them have ever been employed at Blockstream.
Right, but like we just said, it's a social thing, right? There's people exist in a society, and the society is not necessarily determined by your relationships and not necessarily determined by your membership in a specific repository maintainer list. So
I want to offer a bit of a perspective on this from the BCH side, and I didn't say that, okay, consider the alternatives out of just a vacuum. And the reason for that is that we have experienced it firsthand, what happens when there is a lack of process in an extreme way, and I got to witness it in the front row, because BCH is small. Like, in BTC, the average developer, or just any user or holder, would be more removed from all the quote unquote important people, because the community is larger, and there's a lot more capital involved. So you guys a lot of times don't get to see the front row action. But in BCH, pre 2020, 2021 was when we actually formally uh, got the chip process out. Pre 2020, we got a kind of extreme version of what happens when we don't have a process. Basically, a very small cabal of people just took control of the thing, and push and adopted practices that solidified their control, and often just got things through, ran things through without considerations for the rest of the community, or just general good practices, and then made up excuses after the fact. And we have observed it firsthand. Things were decided in a increasingly small, you know, smoke-filled room, basically. And this is actually made worse by the nature of cryptocurrencies, because people who are not satisfied with the outcome would just leave, right? And so even if the practice becomes egregious, what happens is that eventually you filter down more and more people who agree to your thing, and then it becomes a private business, basically. And this is most obvious in the chain that split from BCH in the fateful year of 2020. That has now became basically fully a private enterprise. So we did get to see that firsthand, and that has shaped our decisions and processes since. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that it would play out any differently on the bigger chains, except that it will be much more obscured because the community is much larger.
And not only obscured, but even in BCH, right? There's always an opportunity to interpret things in a cynical way and a kind of optimistic way. And there was plenty of what turned out to be cope, right? As on some of those consensus decisions that were made on BCH, as you said, fundamentally in a smoky back room. And the wider community was, cheering things on to some degree and saying, things are great, they're decentralized, whatever. But you always need to have that cynical check on yourself and look at things and really check, am I coping? Am I making this up? Is that really how decisions were made? And as you named said, we saw it firsthand, and whatever cope was there in the end, it was quite centralized. The way the actual final decisions were made, regardless of how they were presented or how people interpreted them. So Reardon, I don't know how things are done exactly, right? But having experienced that twice now, I'm much more cynical on what's actually where the actual decisions are being made in BTC. But again, this is subjective, and it's hard to say objectively what's actually happening without having an ear in all those rooms, right?
Yeah, exactly. I love the perspective, and I appreciate the kind of the transparency and kind of realism about where BCH was, because I remember that period kind of relatively soon after the BCH BTC split, when we would joke over on the Bitcoin side about how centralized the decision making was on BCH and kind of laugh about it. So it's I think both chains have had periods of that kind of over centralization of power or control, depending on how you want to look at it. And we've now, here we are several years later, five years later, let's say, and we now have two different resolutions to that. On the Bitcoin side, what we have is a resolution of we're not going to let anybody control Bitcoin again, and that includes any kind of group through a process or anything like that. And on the BCH side, the community developed a process to create, let's call it a safe way for the community to reach consensus, or safe enough way for the community to reach consensus. So Bitcoin, and that's why Bitcoin hasn't changed since Taproot, right? Taproot was kind of the last movement by the somewhat centralized control of Bitcoin. And we don't have a process to change Bitcoin forward. I'm hoping that we can find at least consensus around certain specific changes, but I don't know that we'll ever find a process again.
So one of the hallmarks of science is being able to make predictions. And I'm a little bit of a scientist myself. And on this topic, you assert that that BTC has this process and that it exists and that it's real. And I somewhat, not weakly but medium strength assert that that's not actually the case. And so I hope you'll keep it in your mind and look forward as because I know that there's these things you're interested in changing, and you'll need to compare what you think is going to happen and what actually happens. Because what my prediction is that you're not going to get a reasonable response, and you're going to be baffled by what seems like irrational resistance to something that is probably obviously a greater good for BTC. But we'll see what happens. I hope you're actually right? That's always been a fair point that I think many rational BCH people would say, and anybody would say, is that, as long as somebody is achieving success in, permissionless global money and so forth, then that's a win for everybody. So I hope you're right.
That's what we all want. Yeah. So what I'll say is, and again, there's a lot of things that have gone into my own personal journey as I went from, commercial Bitcoin software developer for 5-ish years before kind of starting to move towards the more open source, open community portion of the Bitcoin world, and now just recently to go full time towards trying to be in the open Bitcoin contributor world. And one of the things that has driven me along that path was I had a brief period at the end of, what year was that? 2023, where I could dedicate pretty much my full effort to coding for Bitcoin and trying to build consensus for Bitcoin. And in just, it was like a month and a half or 2 months, I made significant strides towards getting people kind of on board with the idea of making certain kind of careful changes to Bitcoin. And then I got a job because I wasn't ready essentially to not have a job at that time and kind of be just out in the world trying to plow my own path. And I got a job, and the momentum I had that I thought would continue with other people that I thought were enthusiastic about it and wanted to carry it forward didn't really carry forward as much. And so I've been frankly struggling with this realization about the world. What I think is true is that, and I hope it's not me, by the way, but is that the right person or people will move Bitcoin consensus forward, because it takes a certain type of energy and a certain type of personality, and then along with the right combination of also coding skills and everything. Like, there's a bunch of pieces that come together into someone like Vladimir van der Laan being able to guide and build consensus for something like this. So that's why now I'm back to full-time trying to work on education and kind of consensus building for Bitcoin, because if no one else is going to be able to move it forward, I'm at least going to give it a try, and we'll find out this year if I'm kind of right about that.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you're going to check whether it works or not. Let me ask a different kind of touchy question. I don't know if it's touchy for you, actually. So there was RBF by default. For the listeners, that's replaced by fee, which is, I'm not going to get into it, actually. I'll maybe link something later. But there was RBF by default. And this is not technically a consensus change, but it's definitely within the realm of social consensus. It's an important, feature or anti-feature, or it's an important detail of the way Bitcoin works in practice. So, what are your thoughts about that? Would you say that's in the gray zone of consensus, social consensus? And then what was the process for that? Like, how did that get activated? This is obviously a loaded question because I think this one has a lot less nuance to it than the other question.
Oh, I love this one because I was personally involved in our full RBF by equals 1 becoming the default. So the long and short there, I'll start with the short version and then I'll give a little more nuance to it, to your point there. The short version is that it was activated because the properties of relay rules for Bitcoin are essentially the opposite of the properties for consensus rules, which is to say that with relay rules, if even a small fraction of the network accepts a more broad relay interpretation, then that kind of is necessarily the truth of the network. Whereas with consensus rules, the whole network must accept the transactions as valid or they are simply invalid. And so what happened with full RBF becoming the default is that a group of us, myself included, spun up a alternate relay network that ran before Core made it a default. But I think before Core even made it an option, we were running full RBF equals 1 on a sub network of the Bitcoin network with preferential peering that reliably delivered full RBF transactions to miners. So we proved that if even a small percentage, I think it was like 1 or 2% of nodes, are willing to relay these transactions, they get reliably transferred to miners if those 1 or 2% are preferentially peering both with miners and with each other. And so once we had proved that these transactions were going to reliably relay because we were going to run that network that relayed them, then Core essentially had no choice but to make it the default, because that was then protective of all the other nodes on the network having an accurate view of the transactions that were likely to be mined.
You've already created a pseudo split. Congratulations.
I would, so before getting into the nuances of how relay rules work, I would just want to point out that that strategy, at least technically, might be less effective than you might think, because it is not sufficient that some people would hear about that some people, or even a lot of people, would hear about the transaction that the relay rules otherwise do not want people to hear about. It would also need to be mined and get into wallet providers. So, in the end, even if you have a very large relay network set up with the looser rules, you would still need to convince pools to accept it. And then, probably the wallet providers would only be laggingly persuaded after the miners made it clear that made it clear that they have to do it. So
right, that's exactly what we did. We
yeah.
set up preferential peering to the miners and made sure that transactions that were full RBF transactions reliably were mined. And as soon as they were reliably mined, got into blocks, then Core was forced to also turn that on as the default.
Right, but what I mean is that if 99%, it could turn out that in 99% of the time the pre-RBF transaction was mined. So in that case, it wouldn't be such an effective strategy anymore.
Right, but that's what we proved that to not be the case. We made sure that when someone attempts a full RBF, that is the replacement, the higher fee transaction was the one that was reliably mined. And once we demonstrated that was the case factually, then Core says, okay, that is what the state of the network is. We must follow the state of the real network.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying that in the end, what decided was that you convinced enough miners instead of setting up a relay network. That is all.
Well, it's both, right? Because what has to happen, right, is that when someone broadcasts a full RBF, it must get reliably mined. So in order for it to get reliably mined, it must both relay reliably and be mined reliably. And as soon as we achieved that, we demonstrated factually that the network was going to mine these transactions, and therefore the only correct move for Core was to make that the default so that all nodes had a consistent view of the network.
Well,
I want to ask a question about the statement having a consistent view of the network, because there's obviously the difference between what's in mempool and what actually gets mined into blocks. And if I'm just some node operator and I spin up a node, tomorrow, and today there's all of these full RBF transactions that may or may not have gotten relayed to that node. Regardless of what's happening there, the miners ultimately select those transactions, and ultimately I'm going to my node is going to follow the chain, right? Not necessarily the mempool. And so I am not sure if I agree with the framing that that core would be forced to make that a default. I mean, I do understand, yeah, you want to have a consistent view of the network state, but I don't think that it's actually relevant at the end of the day unless you're using zeroconf, which I think is really the main point of contention when it does come to RBF, is that it does break the first scene principle. So, I mean, regardless, yeah, you could technically RBF on, say, like BCH today if you were to submit a transaction directly to a miner that double spent some input, but the miner would still have to mine that transaction. The rest of the network would then, okay, well, the block is valid, right? Okay, well, I guess I'll just eject the first spend out of my local mempool and just follow the chain because the chain is law.
Right. So exactly. And so broadly what you said is correct. The one thing that I'll just kind of clarify or tweak slightly is that one of the things that Core has made a specific kind of part of their goal in operating in maintaining the Bitcoin Core software is that as close as possible, the public kind of default Bitcoin Core mempool, that if you run a public node and it has the default mempool, it should, as close as possible, be able to predict the contents of the next block so that you can have accurate fee prediction on your public node. And so that, given that that's one of their concrete intentional goals, that's why I'm saying when they were forced to turn on full RBF by default, because once those higher fee replacement transactions were reliably getting into blocks when they were broadcast on the public network, then the only way for Core to meet their goal of having an accurate prediction of the next block and therefore accurate fee estimation was to accept those transactions by default.
Yeah, that actually makes total sense. I completely forgot about the fee market aspect. A little bit spoiled.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that last part is what made it make sense. That's very interesting. So yeah, probably the topic of RBF is a whole discussion in itself, which isn't really directly related. The value of or the anti-value of RBF is a whole
Right,
other
that's so out of scope right now. We're talking about consensus.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to ask, going forward then, so you have mentioned that you want to see some changes happen to BTC consensus. Could you give a quick summary of what those changes you'd like to see are, or like the range of things that you think would be from, minimal, like positive thing to do, or like to the best case thing that would happen? What is it that you want to see change on consensus, and what's your plans towards getting there?
Yeah, I've been refining my views on this over years now, and I would say just the general thing is that I would like to see Bitcoin consensus rules or script rules improve to make building, let's say, just protocols on top of Bitcoin easier and better. This has been, I would say, the path for Bitcoin for many years already. Both SegWit and Taproot have specific concrete benefits for protocols built on top of them. The Lightning Network has its ups and its downs. I'm not a Lightning Network shill. I want to make that clear. But the Lightning Network also is an effective way to route payments, especially between, call it semi-trusted parties on a call it large node network. Tiny edge nodes don't work super well on Lightning Network. We all kind of know about the limitations there. But for larger nodes communicating with each other, it's a very effective routing network for payments. And it was enabled by the changes leading up to SegWit and SegWit itself, and then improves with Taproot. And I would like to see that improve further. Not only because it improves the Lightning Network, but because the general ideas that underlie the Lightning Network of payment channels and sharing UTXOs between parties and being able to shift value within a shared UTXO, I think are very valuable. And so I think when we improve the Lightning Network, we also more generally improve payment channels and shared UTXOs. So that's one of the things top of mind for improving Bitcoin. And
could you quickly explain why do you think that's important? So I think it's a good opportunity to say why, a little bit higher level beyond the technical part. Why do you think that's important?
Essentially, I will make a bold claim, which is that at no scale of human society will a flood fill broadcast network with global consensus be appropriate for people's day-to-day transacting. And so we must find a way to move day-to-day transacting off of the global broadcast flood fill network into another mechanism. And one way of doing that is a routed payment channel network. There are many other ways of doing that. And the other ways of doing that are also enabled by things that improve the routed payment channel network.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry, please go ahead. I guess you were going to get into what your plan is for helping to achieve that.
Yeah. So one way that we could achieve that, just to be kind of transparent, and I've actually been, I would say, half seriously, I think it's how we actually started this conversation, or how we ended up in this conversation. One way to do that I'm half serious about is that we could take the amazing work that you all have done on Bitcoin Cash, take your script interpreter and put it in Bitcoin as a Taproot version, because your script interpreter has all of the features that someone could possibly want, pretty much. There's a few more that you're kind of finishing up still, but you're getting very close, that anyone would want in order to improve the kind of things that I was just talking about. So that'd be one potential option. I don't think that's the best option, but I think it would work, and it would be fun. It would actually be fun to build. I'm frankly tempted to build it and publish the code for doing that as an exercise, and just showing, hey, this is a thing that could be done. Let's not pretend it's impossible, because it could be done. So anyway,
that's how you get assassinated.
The Blockstream assassins will get me. Yes, exactly.
I don't even know if it's Blockstream you got to worry about. You got like the rest of the Bitcoin community is going to come for your head.
Anyway, so the reason I don't think that's the best approach is that in the Bitcoin world, people are very concerned about second and third order effects. The example that has been coming up and that we've been discussing lately is when you enable, let's say, everything that's in current Bitcoin Cash script, then it becomes possible for application developers to build protocols that leak significant value from the protocol itself to the miners. And there's many ways they can build those. So I'm not trying to like single out some singular application here, right? And that's actually the point, is that with something as powerful as Bitcoin Cash script is, there would be unlimited ways that let's call it degens, for the lack of a better word, degen app developers could build protocols that leak value out to miners. And the problem with having there be unlimited ways for them to leak value is that miners are not going to be able to keep up. The degen developers will build new applications week by week by week to capture pumps, and the miners are going to struggle to capture that value, except if there's a centralized block template builder who specializes in capturing that value. And so the specialized template builder is going to say to miners, hey, pay us 1% of the difference between the Bitcoin core software's block template and our block template, and we'll sell you our block templates for that 1%. And every miner is going to sign up. So now we end up in Bitcoin with a centralized block template producer building the templates for all blocks. And so it's not that there's some specific problem with Bitcoin Cash script or other big improvements or big changes we can make to Bitcoin scripting. It's that if we do it, then there's infinite ways that applications can create opportunities for miners to extract additional value. And therefore, we get to kind of why I'm proposing a certain limited set of changes. I was talking with Post Capone on MySpaces earlier. I guess that was earlier this week on Wednesday, about the fact that there's a wide spectrum in what we enable there, going between what we have right now, which is extremely limited, and there's basically very limited capability to build any protocols, whether they be on-chain protocols or second layer protocols on Bitcoin script as it is. And then, of course, Cash Bitcoin Cash script has the ability to build many, many protocols, almost unlimited capability, both on the base layer protocols and for second layer protocols. There's a wide spectrum between there, and we can go just a little bit at a time. And so what I'm looking at in looking at the consensus changes for Bitcoin is what's the greatest bang for our buck, where the bang I want to get is improving both on-chain and off-chain protocol building. And the buck I'm spending is how many new ways can people fuck this up when they go build their degen apps. And so that's what I'm trading off, I would say, is between improving protocol development, but not having unlimited ways for degens to leak value to miners.
I'm going to be honest. This whiffs a little bit of Luke and his decisions of what's a good transaction and what's a bad transaction, which he has a long history of throwing judgments out on. But I find the framing of leaking value to miners as a evil per se as an interesting framing that I don't agree with. Like per se,
that's why
it's a bad thing.
Yeah. It's very specific, right? I have no problem with protocols leaking value to miners, right? That's not a bad thing on its own. The problem is,
sorry, can I just ask, when you say leaking value to miners, do you mean like miners reaping more like fee revenue out of these transactions?
No, he means
miners
in wrapping things, right? I assume.
Yeah, well, it's any way where if I write a protocol, the simplest example would be a protocol where the protocol can be executed in either 2 or 3 transactions, and those transactions can be reordered after signing. If I broadcast those transactions, all 3 of them, potentially a miner can pull out the middle one and then get the fees from all of those transactions, but only actually spending the block space on 2 of the 3. And so the miner has changed the execution of the protocol in a way where they get more value, but it's no longer the intended outcome that the participants wanted.
Well, I mean, the outcome of a protocol is what it does, and that just sounds like a shitty protocol, honestly. Like if you have absolutely. A bad protocol that does that. So, and for anybody who's listening, there's a huge difference here between what people are accustomed to with EVM and account based systems, where miners literally, like, their main job is to order transactions to a large degree. That's not the case with UTXO systems like BCH, Bitcoin, BTC. The ordering transactions is largely, except in some very exceptional cases, something that's asserted by the users who are making those transactions. What miners can do is choose to not include a transaction and do something else on top of one, but they can't really, except in some exceptional cases, reorder things. I don't know, that smells like a bit of a red herring. And I can give a counter example. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. Once you introduce the combination of check data sig and some form of introspection, or we're calling it check sig from stack, but check data sig is in some ways a better name, whatever. Once you introduce those 2 things, then transactions do become reorderable on Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash as well.
Only in specific cases. Yeah, no, that's not a general thing that's true.
But that's what I'm saying. And so the question in looking at these protocol, these consensus changes is not, is it okay that people can write bad protocols or write weird protocols? I'm not being, just be clear, I understand what you're saying about Luke, and I'm not trying to like say these are bad transactions or they're wrong, they shouldn't be allowed. What I'm saying is that if there are many different ways that miners could gain additional revenue by resequencing transactions or omitting certain transactions, if miners can extract additional value in a lot of different ways, then miners will be incentivized to pay a specialized provider to build the templates for them that extract that value.
Yeah, I don't see why that has to be so extremely centralized. That's not like a magic, right? That's just algorithms. Algorithms can be made to discover that kind of thing.
Right.
But let me give a counterpoint.
Different ways matters.
So let me give a counterpoint to a case where it's actually a very good thing that miners would want to be looking at and participating in the chain. For example, there's the AnyHedge protocol that we made, and you publish a transaction between 2 parties who fund in one transaction a contract, and then that transaction goes through time, and at the end of the transaction it pays out to the 2 parties different amounts. And that UTXO is fundamentally anyone can spend. It's just that you have to have the right data to spend it. And this is a thing where it would be great to have miners who are actively looking at the chain and being like, hey, look, we mined this block and it had 5,000 AnyHedge transactions in it. And we are the ones who activated that transaction because it's permissionless and it's trustless in terms of the code. It decides how the payout happens. The miner can't decide anything about how it's paid out, but they're the ones who activate the payout, and they get paid a fee for it. And it's like that's a service they would be providing. So just wanted to put it out there. That's not an evil per se. And yeah, thanks for providing some
absolutely
some on that.
I agree completely. I'm not in that Luke camp, but this is like the fact that miners can potentially gain value by also serving the network better is great. And even to that point, the question is always, can we as the open source developers of Bitcoin sufficiently capture that value for all miners so that there isn't an incentive for them to seek out third-party development of additional template builders to gain that value, right?
What if the value
the open source community can
gained...
do it well?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. My bad.
Okay, so if we as the open source community can do a good job of template building, so we capture all that value from miners, then we want to have, frankly, as much of that as we want. The more we have, the better we are serving the community, and the better we're serving both transactors and miners.
Okay, yeah, we should probably leave this point. It's a good debate we could probably have separately. Yeah, that's great. So how is it? We're gonna, I think, finally get into, you intend to make some changes. How do you intend to make those changes happen? What's your process, or what are you aiming to do? Like, what are you, do you have some concrete plans about how you want to make that happen, who you need to convince, and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ITF rough consensus is to some degree a guide for me. The ITF rough consensus process in just what I want to make sure is that the changes that I want to make have no substantive technical objections that have not been addressed. And I think we are getting very close to that at this point. On the changes I want to make, I have a proposal out there called Lenhance. It actually got changed over time. It was originally 4 opcodes. It's still 4 opcodes, but they're slightly different 4 opcodes. And that Lenhance proposal enables a countable number of methods for miners to extract additional value. The most prominent being, because we add checksig from stack, otherwise known as check datasig, and check template verify, we now have a way to have a hash of the transaction on the stack and check a signature against it in a way that does not strictly bind it to a specific previous UTXO. And so with that change, we introduce reordering of transactions as something miners can do in some cases. So we would want to make sure that we enable miners to extract that value when it becomes available. Anyway, so I think that is the set of changes I want to make. And my process from here is first of all going to be to get the code into basically unassailable state. Make sure that the testing is excellent, the code quality is excellent, the commit messages are great, get everything lined up in the code. Then reopen or reping whatever is necessary, the pull requests against the Bitcoin Core repository, so that people can review the code as it is ready to be deployed. And then once it's there, I'm going to basically, my plan is to host a series of conversations with many of the stakeholders in the space. So I will try to talk to miners. I will try to talk to users, go on podcasts, talk to Bitcoin Core developers. I talk to them on IRC. I've already hosted a couple of Core PR review clubs. I will host additional Core PR review clubs with the updates to the code incorporated, and get everybody kind of up to speed on what's happening and what the benefits are of this and why they want to do it. Being very mindful not to let what happened with Taproot happen, not to oversell this. And I've been working with other folks who are working on consensus changes to Bitcoin on that exact topic, because people tend to somewhat oversell things. When they want to get something to happen, they get excited and oversell it. So one of my goals in doing this is going to be avoid any overselling, so that what people are getting is what they actually want, and then they're happy when they get it. frankly, if anything, you want to under promise and over deliver. This might be possible, and hopefully it turns out to be possible. Anyway, so that's the early part of the process, and continuing what I've been doing also of just hosting spaces where people can ask me questions and going to conferences and speaking and being available to talk about things. Because one of the things that, again, the reason we're in this space is that people generally learn best from direct communication with voices, or especially even better with face-to-face, and text conversation or written documents only communicate to a small subset of people.
I see two potential roadblocks there for you, because there's a little bit of irony there, because what you're saying is there is a lot of parallels between what you're saying there and how we approach the chip process, because there is a lot of social outreach that needs to happen. There's a lot of refinement of the test suite and the code quality and all of these kind of checkpoints that we really want to be hitting before we can, as an outside observer, be able to say that consensus is forming. But the roadblocks that I potentially see there are when it comes to actually getting the code into the repository, as well as the bike shedding issue that happens when you are doing the social outreach. So if you have random Twitter user XYZ who just disagrees with the proposal, is that enough to block quote unquote consensus? And then on top of that, if you do the PR into the core repository, and for any reason any of those maintainers decide that consensus has not been reached, and it could be for any arbitrary reason, how would you reconcile those two things?
I mean, I think this is why it takes a certain kind of mindset to have success here, and that is that we can look back historically at the way that Vladimir ran Bitcoin Core and his attitude toward changes and things like that, and the approach that will work, I'm fairly confident, is to be just very patient and calm in, correcting people who let's say, oh, what about this? We've already talked about that. That's been resolved in this way. Just very, very directly resolving things, and not essentially letting the bike shed become a blocker. If the technical objections have already been addressed, they've already been addressed. And that's just a fact. It's not like, oh, this user can block it because they bring something up. It's like, no, if they bring something up that's already been addressed, it's already been addressed. That's fine. They can bring it up 1,000 times. It's already been addressed. And it doesn't change the fact that it's been addressed. So there's a certain level of essentially stoicism or relaxedness that will enable us to move past those things. And what has historically happened on Bitcoin is that people start screaming, and as soon as people start screaming, they've lost. And that's why I don't want this to be me. I don't want to be the one doing this, because I also tend to start screaming. And so the challenge for me is going to be to not start screaming as I face the natural resistance that people will have. So there's an aspect of giving the benefit of the doubt here, that people are asking these things because they genuinely don't know the answer. They don't realize it's already been addressed, and they're not malicious. They're not trying to block consensus. They're not intentionally dumb. They genuinely don't know. They're doing their best, and the only thing that we can do is respond to them patiently and say, this is what's been addressed. This is how it's been addressed. And by doing that over and over and over again, consensus will be reached.
Let me flip that question to the. Oh, sorry, Khaleesi, go ahead.
I was going to say that still leaves the issue of actually getting the code into the repository and then actually getting people to run that code.
Yeah.
All right, but
I was going to say the flip side of it, which is if some random person says no, or some particular company says no, it's like, okay, that's a convincing process. But what if at the end Core just says no? And from your perspective, you will have addressed. Right? I'm sorry, what?
Core isn't some monolith, right? There are 5 maintainers. They're relatively independent.
It doesn't get merged, right? The merge doesn't happen.
Like your PR. Let's use CTV as an example, because this is we have historical context here. Jeremy Rubin, we can look at him. We can say, yeah, CTV, I would say, is a pretty well-researched proposal. There was code, there were tests, there was broad outreach. He championed this for years and years, and it's still not in Bitcoin to this day, despite, I would say, most of at least like the sandwich camp that you represent, like, all agree like this is something that's probably good for Bitcoin that we should probably be doing. And then also contrasting that to how quickly comparatively Taproot went through, even with the disconnect and the social outreach, like that's just really dissonant for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that goes into all of this, and I've sat down and talked with Jeremy at length about what's happened with him, and he was at the OpNext conference in November that the Block Space Media folks hosted, and he gave a presentation about his experience with it, which if you haven't watched it, is I think very worth watching from OpNext in November. I like Jeremy. He's an incredibly smart guy, and actually, the challenge for Jeremy is that he's too smart by double, I would say. And I'm a relatively knowledgeable Bitcoin developer. I understand Bitcoin, I would say, better than many people, although I don't think anyone really fully understands Bitcoin. And I have to get Jeremy to slow down about 1,000 times in any given hour of conversation in order to keep up with him. And so part of why Jeremy struggled is that, you know, he wrote all these blog posts, he did all this outreach, and unfortunately, most of what he wrote and most of what he said went over most people's heads. And so nobody felt like they were included in the process, like they understood what he was talking about, and they were ready to say, yes, I want this too, because all of it just sounded like magic to them. He's not able to tie it to things people have experience with and make it real for them, because he's so freaking goddamn smart that it's very hard for him to slow his brain down to real people levels. And it's just the fact of when you're 6 standard deviations above the mean in intelligence, how do you communicate with regular people? I am fortunate to be dumber than Jeremy in that regard.
Well, I mean, you know, if we're talking to other technical people, not everything should be really going over everyone's head. I mean, especially if we're talking like the core maintainers, the people who are really reviewing that PR, fellow developers, the overall technical community is probably the best position to evaluate those proposals compared to, say, the broader social Bitcoin community.
Well, right. But again, as we saw with Taproot, in Bitcoin at least, what's going to drive the activation of something is going to be that you get the users on board. And so Taproot had the users on board due to a bug in the bridge between users and developers. And CTV was never able to get users on board because there wasn't a translation layer. The bridge didn't exist. And so part of my job, if you will, is going to be to build that bridge for CTV, and the related changes included LEnhance.
Nice. So, yeah, obviously we have different takes on how things are going to play out in the future. But I have a proposal. We probably need to wrap up. It's gotten quite long for all of us, and I've really enjoyed the conversation and hearing your perspective on things. I have a proposal. 2 things. One is with the proposal that you'd like to get merged in. I really recommend that you set yourself some deadlines to decide, and you may have done this already, but to decide, when enough is enough. And if things don't get merged into core, then at some point, right, you can't do it the rest of your life. You can't keep beating a dead horse. If it happens, right, if it goes in, then great, you're right and I was wrong, and that'll be great thing. So, but if it does take time, I hope you will set some kind of timeline for yourself so that you can decide to move on to productive things. So either you move on to productive things or you come back and gloat and be like, haha, you guys didn't know what you were talking about. So I hope you'll do that. And the other is, regardless of all of that, I hope you would come to BeatBliss, the conference that's coming up in May. And you can come as an alias and not tell anyone you're coming, not tell anyone who you are. You can just put a sandwich hat on or whatever it is you want, and we'll all just be like, yeah, wink, no problem. But just come and see, because a lot of the things you say are well in line, besides RBF, are well in line with what with how the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem actually works. And it would be great to have you there, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you. So yeah, I hope you'll consider showing up to that conference. It's always a good time, and I think
it sounds great. I will definitely not be there. May is always a crazy ass month for me. There's 3 birthdays in May in my family, and then I also already have a commitment to go to Bitcoin Vegas at the end of May. So I will not be there. Although I appreciate the invite, and it does sound like a great time. Maybe next year.
Weird, and I hope I'll see you in Vegas because I'm gonna see if I can swing. I don't know if they're doing open source tickets again, but I went to Nashville last year, and so I hope I
think
can
they
see you
are.
there.
Yeah, do it. Great. The other thing is for me, it's really a matter of I'm gonna either I will do what I've said I'm going to do, and that will essentially prove the good intentions of the people involved, and in good faith, putting in the good faith effort will result in a good faith result. And if it doesn't, what that will tell me is that it's time for there to be a fork of the Bitcoin software, not a fork of the Bitcoin network, but a fork of the Bitcoin software. And so if I'm not going to put a concrete number of months or years on it right now, but if in some time I have not succeeded in moving consensus forward in Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin core software project, what you'll see is that I will join someone, whether it be Eric Voskuil in LibBitcoin, or Jeremy Rubin made a fork called Bitcoin Pure that he's done at least some work on, or starting my own project. You'll see me make a fork of the Bitcoin software and try a different route, essentially. So we'll see what the future holds. But that's my thoughts. And thanks for this conversation. This was great fun. Maybe we'll do it again in a month or so.
Yeah.
That's great. Actually, on that point, that's such a great one. And I'd love to keep going. Actually, I regret saying we should wrap this up. That point
Seems a little
about
early to me.
Are you okay for just a little bit more?
Dude, I booked it. I've got time. Yeah, I can go for like another hour if we really needed to. But
yeah, I've got 45 minutes.
All right, I don't think we need that much. But yeah, what you said is fantastically interesting, right? Because I don't want to go into old history, but alternative clients have existed, and they have been championed by well-spoken, well-written, well-rounded individuals in the past, right? And so I'm very interested in how, in detail, how you think you can make, I'm not saying you can't, right? How you think you can make a fork of the software with consensus changes when core doesn't agree with you. Yeah. Right. And I actually know the answer to this because we did this. Because I'm not sure if you know the history, but there was the original, fundamentally the reference node similar to Core that emerged from the BCH BTC split back in 2017. It was a Bitcoin ABC, and that node was run by all the miners and so forth. And at some point they went rogue. The maintainer, from my perspective, right, went rogue and a bit insane, and whatever. That's its own history, and it had to be booted basically, and had to be replaced.
We had the fortune or misfortune of being presented with the clearest case possible of maintainer abuse in all of cryptocurrency.
Yes.
The maintainers attempted to change consensus to pay themselves. I
remember that.
Yeah, it was insane. It was insane. So it was,
will be remembered for generations.
It was a very non-trivial process to replace the reference implementation that all miners were running. So I'm not saying that that's what you have to do. I'd like to hear what your plan is, unless it's like the super secret ninja plan that you can't let people know about. But if you can, I'd like to hear like what it is. How you plan to fork without splitting.
Quick interjection. You do know about Bitcoin XT, right? Reading that history.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Let's not get into the old history. I just want to hear about.
Yeah, we don't got to rehash it. I just wanted to make sure that was, an awareness.
Yeah. So I've been in open source for a very long time now, and I don't know if you guys remember the split between the X-Free86 project and the Xorg project in the broader open source Linux world. But I think that's a very telling example of how these things happen. And it's exactly what you said, frankly, Emergent Reasons, that when there's a clear case of the maintainers not acting in good faith anymore, then it actually is not so hard. It's a lot of work, but it's not a massive, intractable social problem anymore to shift the consensus reference implementation over to a new one. And what you do, though, is that you don't initially make it a breaking change. So if I were to go and write a new implementation, because the Bitcoin Core maintainers had demonstrated that they were no longer good faith maintainers for the Bitcoin project, the new implementation would initially be a bug for bug compatible implementation with new maintainership. And then once you have new maintainer, a new group of maintainers, like it wouldn't be just me. If this is going to work, it couldn't be just me. Right? We build a new group of maintainers.
That's what Gavin said. Be careful.
And but again, the question is always, has there actually yet been a demonstration that the current maintainers are no longer the right maintainers for the project? And so I could, the question is, do I pick the right time to do that or not? And if I pick the right time to do that, then the community will be like, you know what, you're right. The maintainers that are currently maintaining Bitcoin Core are no longer the right maintainers. Now, my personal opinion is that they are. I know several of them. I've talked to them. I think they're thoughtful, good maintainers for the project. They're acting in good faith. They're making good decisions. And if I'm proven wrong, it will be abundantly clear that they are not. And when it is abundantly clear, then it'll be fairly easy to build a new group of maintainers that replace them. And so that's the reason why the approach that's going to work here is this kind of extremely patient, assuming good faith, is because when you do that, either they necessarily do the right thing and merge the code, or they necessarily prove themselves to not be in good faith. And that's what happens. And then the project is replaced.
Are you aware that miners, large miners, have signed an agreement that says they will exclusively run core software? So you would be aiming to breach that agreement, to have miners breach that agreement, among other things.
Wait, that was an actual legal contract?
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a legal contract, but it's definitely a social contract that was signed.
The Bitcoin Core as a software implementation of the Bitcoin protocol that currently runs the main Bitcoin BTC network is an idea. And the location of that idea is not necessarily the Bitcoin Core GitHub repository where it currently exists. And this, I think, is one of the confusions that people have about this whole situation, is the idea, the over-identification of the 5 people who maintain Bitcoin Core, the GitHub project Bitcoin Core, and the Bitcoin network being kind of over-identified as the same thing. And so the fact that miners have signed an agreement to run Bitcoin Core, that doesn't change anything that I just said, right? If it's proven that those 5 people or whoever it is at the time this happens are no longer the good faith correct maintainers, then the miners, instead of having an obligation to follow those no longer good faith people, they will actually have an equal obligation to switch, because it'll be demonstrably true that they are no longer good faith maintainers.
Yeah, people in bad faith don't make it obvious. It's going to be a lot harder for you to catch somebody in bad faith. They know they're bad faith.
As I said,
I also feel like that's going to be completely subjective. I don't think there's ever a way to make an objective decision that the maintainers are the correct maintainers. And I really think there are a lot of parallels to, the BCH chain split history there, because, let's just say consensus in BCH was made exclusively of me, Emergent, and I'm Uname here. If we made that decision that, these maintainers aren't the right maintainers for Bitcoin, we went and made our own alternative implementation, and we got a couple of the people who agree with us that our implementation was the right one, and bada bing bada boom, now we have Bitcoin Cash, right? It's the exact same thing, from my point of view at least.
Let me ask a specific question. So I'm trying to look for what the bar is going to be for you deciding that they're acting in bad faith, and obviously that's a very hard thing to pin down, because it's like a hypothetical and it hasn't happened, but it has happened in the past from our perspective. So the hypothetical would be, what if you make this client and suddenly you find that everyone running this client is getting DDoSed extremely hard, and just having their networks, not only their nodes, but their whole networks, IP ranges, taken down or DDoSed and disrupted. That would be one thing. Would you consider that? It won't be obvious where it's coming from. You won't know who it's coming from. Would you consider that like a a potential tick on the bad faith checklist, like the qualification
No, because as you
list,
said,
or
I have
would
no
that
idea
not?
where it's coming from.
Right. And if let's say I don't know, um, just because it's an easy boogeyman. So Blockstream, they come out and be like, you know what, this alternative node is objectively bad, dangerous, and an attack on Bitcoin. If they said that, like those specific words, for example, would you consider that to be bad faith, or?
I would say that, yeah, if an individual says that, I would say that individual is acting in bad faith. And obviously I know that has happened in the past.
Okay. You'd say that individual's acting in bad faith. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. Obviously, as I said, there's no way to judge something before it happens.
And to be clear, like this happened to me. Like when I what did I post? I posted something about like, I'm loving this rumor about OpCat being miner activated soon. And people like started calling me an attack on Bitcoin. I'm like, well, the people who are calling me an attack on Bitcoin are the ones I'm not really going to trust going forward. Because I was making a comment about the benefits of a rumor spreading in order to basically move a conversation forward. And I was being attacked as though I was promoting a miner activated minority soft fork. And so the people that react in that way, where they call things an attack on Bitcoin because they don't understand them, are obviously not the ones that matter, essentially.
Right. Okay. So do you have a rough kind of deadline for yourself to get this done before you say, whether it was bad intent or just my ideas were not good enough, or my, ability to convince was not good enough, etc. Do you have some kind of rough deadline that you're going to be like, yeah, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm going to do other things going forward?
I really don't. And a big part of the reason I don't is because I'm just starting this tentative journey into trying to be kind of an independent developer and educator, and I don't know how effective I'm going to be at it. So the question is, there's got to be some intersection of how well I think I've done versus how well I've been received in the community. So if I think I've done a really good job for a whole year and I haven't made significant progress, like getting significant code merged into Bitcoin Core, then I might start to get discouraged. But if I think I've done a shitty job, then instead I'll double down and try to do a better job going forward. So it really depends how well I do to know when it might be.
I think I want to ask this way. Do you think it's realistic?
Wait. Just let me just a little bit more. Like, would you work on it for 5 years?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, Khalid.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, do you think it's realistic to get any of the proposed upgrades right now, let's say it's CTV or L-Enhance, anything along those lines, before the next halving?
Yes, I think that is realistic.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like that's like a good, like, just time delineation right there. It's okay per halving cycle, because obviously we have our yearly upgrade cycle, but I mean, once every 4 years, right? Can we get an upgrade in? I feel like that's a good benchmark to look at.
Yeah, and there's been this long delay after Taproot, which, as I said earlier, I think is largely about a failure of an effective community leader to emerge. And I really, really don't want to be that person. But if I'm the only one who's going to try it, then I'll end up being that person. But it's not what I want in the world.
So I would also want to pile onto this with one thing that might add to your urgency, which is that the longer it takes for you to for you to push for your desired upgrade after Taproot, the more value would be built, or rather just laid on the fact that BTC hasn't changed in a while. The Lindy effect is real, and people rightly or wrongly value things a lot of times based just on the fact that it has not changed and is really difficult to change. The more difficult it is to change, a lot of times many people would assign value to that. So the longer it takes for you to push for your change from Taproot, it may become more difficult as the network just meets and just naturally aggregates around the fact that no change has happened. Wow, that has been awesome, especially if the price is high.
Yeah.
Naturally, if the price drops a lot, then people might have different thoughts. But yeah, so do consider that.
I absolutely. I think that's frankly one of the reasons I don't want to be like any kind of a leader in this. But again, if no one else is doing it effectively, I will. Or I'll try at least. Let's say is that I I don't I don't think I'm the best person to be the leader. I don't think that I have the reputation or the skills, or there are so many other people that I've seen do this that I think are various combinations of smarter, better, more charismatic, etc. than I am. And so I agree. There's a certain level of it's not like strong urgency, but let's say loose urgency around that, as you said, because of the Lindy effect of not changing, and also just losing practice at changing. Right, people getting just comfortable also is a problem, even aside from the assigning value to it, but just getting comfortable. So no, I totally agree, and it's one of the reasons I feel resistant when people say, "Well, what's the hurry?" Well, the hurry is that if we want to be able to make Bitcoin the best money that it can possibly be, as both your community and our community want it to be, then the longer we wait, the worse. And we shouldn't delay just for the sake of delaying. We should do things as the code is ready. We should have done CTV earlier. We didn't have the right kind of leader and momentum for it at the time, but we still should have done it.
All right, enough piling on. It's been a great conversation, and I wish you success. I also wish you had been around in full time, 2014 to 2016. Maybe history would have been different, and eventually, I hope that you're actually going to change your mind and think that the best thing you can do and the most effective thing you can do to achieve a better future is to come build on Bitcoin Cash. Obviously, you don't agree with that today, but I'm just going to put it out there that I hope that's the case, because it's been great to talk with you, and you're a very reasonable guy. And I just happen to think that you don't know the level of trouble you're about to get into, and I'll be happy to be proven wrong.
I appreciate it. I've enjoyed talking with and learning from you guys. And one of the things that I want to just toss in as an ending thing here is y'all have me thinking really hard about the benefits of hard fork upgrades versus soft fork upgrades, and it's something that while I don't think I'm going to overall change my conclusion there, I'm glad to be thinking hard about it. So yeah, thanks for the great conversation, and I look forward to doing it again sometime soon.
All right.
Can I just throw in one last quick thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sorry. And this is kind of open-ended because it really applies to us as much as it applies to BTC, but we call it the someone problem, right? And this is kind of what you're describing, like somebody's got to step up and champion these changes and do the spreading of information and everything. But do you feel like there is a certain dissonance between the idea of having this someone problem where somebody needs to actually do the thing, somebody actually has to merge the code, somebody actually has to run the code, somebody actually has to do that outreach, etc.? Do you think there's a disconnect between that and the idea of decentralization? I feel like would be a lot of pushback, or could be a lot of pushback on that idea, because if there is, there's just this guy and he's trying to make these changes and he's trying to build quote unquote consensus, but that's not decentralized. That's just one guy trying to make changes to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is this immaculate thing that nobody can change and blah, 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 right? Like, do you think that that's something that is a valid concern or anything like that?
Yes, it is the short one-word answer. But also I'll say there has to be the right someone, and again, is why I don't really want to be that someone. I don't think I'm the right someone, because the right someone has a way of communicating about what they want to do that is non-threatening to people, so they don't feel like there's this guy pushing things. Instead, they feel like there's this guy just opening the door to a path that was there anyway. And there's a very difficult communication style and presentation style that will help someone change Bitcoin successfully, because they don't come across as threatening. And unfortunately, that's where I think I struggle. So there is the someone problem, but I also think the right someone can be a leader that facilitates consensus without being threatening to people in the Bitcoin community, and getting that immune response.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then finally, the last thing that I want to end on is if you haven't had a chance to fully read the chip document that we always talk about, I think you would agree with a lot of the stuff in there that's under the section. It's one of the first sections, background assumptions and principles. A lot of the things that we've touched on in this conversation today, we do note as part of those assumptions and principles, like things like the protocol still has room for improvement, but creating this kind of consensus is a really difficult thing to do due to the controversy, due to the social cost, due to the cost for development and getting everybody to actually, run the code. But on the other hand, it's open source. So I think I've talked to you, and I always talk about this on Spaces, the whole Bitcoin metagame concept. I think that really heavily applies here. We're going to run the code that makes the most sense for us to run based on our own subjective values. And I think there always is that subjective element when it comes to these things. So I think you might find, if you haven't already read it, I think you might find that interesting to look into.
Will you? I pulled it up and I tossed it on the replies to the Spaces.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same. A lot of what we've talked about is right there in the chip process, and a lot of the things that you said you yourself have been trying to do is also right there. There's a lot of alignment between the way you see things should be and the chip process. Okay, nobody said anything. I'm gonna wrap it up.
No. Yeah. Go ahead. I didn't want to keep talking because like I said, I could keep talking forever, and it sounds like we want to wrap up. So.
No. I mean, if you have
Thank
something to if you have some important things to cover, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think where we're at now is a good place. I think absolutely check that out if you haven't. And I think we addressed a lot of the potential pitfalls that Reardon might run into. And again, best of luck to you. I mean, I genuinely mean that. Obviously we have our diametrically opposed communities and whatnot. I do echo Emergent's sentiment of hopefully people just come to the conclusion that it's easier to just switch to BCH than it is to keep trying to push for stuff in BTC. But, that's my own biased opinion. And if at the end of the day, we have the same mission of trying to make the best money in the world, we have different approaches to that, which is good. It's a free market. And again, the Bitcoin metagame, people will do what makes most sense to them. So I genuinely do wish you and everyone else trying to champion these things the best of luck in trying to make the best money in the world.
For my little bit of closing comments, we did quite a bit of interrogation, and Reardon, you were exceptionally good at responding to and providing good storytelling and context around the things that you're doing and what's important to you. I hope that you will do that in reverse. I hope you will take some time to question how BCH ecosystem does things, and see if there's any lessons to be learned for yourself on the path that you're headed down. Uname, did you have anything that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
We should do more of those things, not just because they are pleasant, but because I think it is still the case that a lot of people on the internet do not know that the BCH today is very different from the BCH of 2018, and we should let more people know about that. So that's
True. All right, Reardon, I know you've already basically said it, but just in case, is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that this has been great, and I frankly echo what Uname said. It's been surprising to me both how much I have learned from Bitcoin Cash, and I've been trying to bring that back to the Bitcoin community and saying, look, guys, there's important, valuable things we can learn from Bitcoin Cash, and we may disagree with kind of certain underlying ideas about how to build the internet money, but there's still a ton to learn there. And Rusty Russell was shocked when he learned that you guys were already working on something similar to his script restoration with changing the way script limits are applied. So it's been great to learn from you guys and to bring that over to the Bitcoin side. Thank you.
All right, you dirty beat casher. It's good to talk to you guys. Have a good time, everybody.
Right.
Thank you very much,
care.
and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.